Hello, my friends. My name is Joe. This is the Joe Martino Show. And today we're going to talk about a video that I referenced a few weeks ago that I watched that told me the reason our population is declining, the reason that we have adults not having children is because of social media. I'm going to tell you what I think about it. And if you know me, you know that I am not on the side of the popular side when it comes to technology wars. Let's kick it off. This is the Joe Martino Show. Hey friends, welcome back. I hope your day is going well. We are on week 3 of May, which is wild to me. I'm super excited about that because when this podcast drops, we will be, I believe that's Memorial Day weekend. This is the 20th, which means Memorial Day is here. And of course, that is kickoff summer weekend for our family, camping. It is also the weekend to remember those who have given the ultimate sacrifice for our country, those who have died in the line of duty and service to our country. And wherever you're at on things, whatever you feel about politics, it is always good to remember that. A little free word of advice. I guess all of this is free words of advice because it's a free podcast. This is not Veterans Day. So saying, hey, thanks for your service, that will mostly just make guys uncomfortable, guys and girls. I'm not trying to be sexist here. Don't come for me, internet. This weekend is for the people that died. And so it is to remember them. You want to say something to their family members, you can. Don't say anything trite. Right? Sometimes we get caught in that when we're dealing with death. We say things to make things better. And there's nothing that will make that better. So, all right, so this will be Memorial Day. Once again, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. Well, what it does have to do with is that we are looking at my ADHD on full display once again. What I want to talk to you about today is a fascinating video that I talked about a few weeks ago. A friend of mine sent it to me. They sent it to me on TikTok. They were like, hey, what do you think of this? And it was talking about declining birth rates in America, really in the world. And that typically goes bad. There are countries that are far ahead of us in the decline, and we're already seeing how those things are going bad for them. But what made the video incredibly interesting to me was that the guy who was talking about it confidently said, the reason people aren't having children anymore is because of social media. That was his confident answer. And that's wild to me. I think it's time to stop villainizing phones, right? He started out with phones. He was like, it's the phones. Then he went to social media. And we act like somehow there's a magical monkey on our back that we can't not participate in social media, or that we can't not let the things that happen in social media bother us. And that is insane to me. A conversation that I want to get to soonish is talking about phones and kids. I ended up in a conversation recently over phones and kids. And what's interesting to me about the phones and kids conversation is that it's often like when I used to talk to people and tell them I was anti-spanking. Right? I would say something along the lines of, well, I'm anti-spanking. I think there's a lot of research to show that it's bad. I think there's a lot of high costs for it, and occasionally it probably works out. But by and large, the cost of that is too high that I'm not willing to pay it. And immediately the pro spankers would come back with, oh, so you just let your kids do anything? And I was like, no, like I didn't actually advocate for that. I just said we shouldn't hit them. And phones and kids are a little bit like this. In fact, phones and anything are a little bit like this. When I'm like, I don't think the phones are the problem. I actually think saying that phones are the reason we do anything is like blaming a thermometer for a fever. Like that isn't how that works. The thermometer reveals the fever. And I'm okay with us saying like, hey, we need to have some constraints around phones. Sure, for sure we do. But it's just like spanking, like it isn't just the two things. Either you beat them or you just let them run hog wild and do whatever they want. And saying, hey, maybe phones aren't this spawn of Satan giant weapon that came from the 11th layer of hell to corrupt your mind. Maybe we just don't actually chase some things that actually matter, and phones highlight that. And if we were to change those, the phones would be less of an issue. And people really get upset with me on this, and I understand it. I do. I understand, because once we have an idea of what's causing something, For that to be disrupted, it can be very discomforting. Okay, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that social media, phone apps have no impact. Of course they do. But here's the thing. Phones didn't teach us to worship comfort. Phones didn't teach us to avoid sacrifice and hard things. Phones didn't teach us to live for right now. What the phones did was they revealed who we were already becoming. They revealed a worldview that we were already embracing like a long lost relative. Making sure that we make that distinction between what do phones do and what do they reveal, what do apps do and what do they reveal, that matters for mental health, because when you can actually take a look at something and you say, hey, this is revealing what I'm doing, what happens is now you have control for growth. When we blame the objects for human behavior, we stop the beliefs and values underneath the behavior from being examined. And that's where we get in trouble, right? It's like sports. I have so many people tell me, well, I don't understand why you're against sports. And I tell them, I'm not against sports. I actually think sports are a good thing. I'm against how we do sports. I think 2 weeks ago, I was talking to a guy, nice guy, I really like him. And he was talking about how he's just so tired because they have 2 kids playing 2 sports at the same time. You got to go here, you got to go there. I was like, if only you could control your schedule. If only you possessed the ability to tell your child, no. Now here's the thing, it's not the sports. It's what we're doing with the sports. And here's where I get in trouble with people all the time. It's not the phones, it's what we're doing with them. It's not the technology, it's what we're doing with it. And so to say that, well, we're not having kids because of social media, it's insane. And the guy went through kids' whole lives are put online, blah, 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 blah. If they do anything and they regret it, I'll be honest with you, I'm glad phones didn't exist when I was a kid, or at least cameras, because we did stuff that I would not want recorded, right? We joke about that. Gen Xers joke about that. And yet it's true. But here's the thing you have to run out. What does it look like to, instead of saying, oh, it's the phones, because I can't blame this guy for one thing. What does it look like to move from, oh, it's the phones to, oh, it's us, and the phones just reveal what we believe? Because here's what I can't take away from that guy. He's stating the natural conclusion of how we treat phones and kids. In fact, I've thought about doing this one after the one on kids and making a 2-part series. I'm not doing that because this one's so fascinating to me. We need to talk about why are we not having kids? Because when you stop investigating your values and beliefs that drive things, you stop growing. That's true for your mental health. That is true for relationships. It's true for how you parent. And it's absolutely true for the future of our society. I was just talking to a guy this week. I was talking to my brother. This week we're talking about a guy that we know who consistently has troubled relationships, consistently has people who stop talking to him, consistently has people that he thought were friends that aren't anymore. And there is, if you've listened to me for any amount of time, and I think we're at 350 episodes, some relationships have lifespans. But there is also something to consider, and this guy doesn't. Maybe it isn't that the world has changed and relationships are whatever now. Maybe his loss of relationships is a symptom of something that he believes about how he should approach symptoms, and he needs to change that belief, that value, so that he can then have better relationships. But first, let's go ahead and talk about why do we love blaming objects? Why? Right? Because look, we've done it. We've done this all before. There was a time where rock music was blamed. There was a time where comic books were blamed. There was a time where television was blamed. There was a time where video games was blamed. There was a time where internet was blamed. And now we're in the time of blaming smartphones. Did you know that there was a time where novels were blamed? If you had children with bad behavior or wives who didn't obey, that is said with as much dripping sarcasm as I can make. It was the novels. They read too many novels, right? And we're using literally the same arguments. You can become a student of history. You can do some research and go find those arguments from the past. Because we've always liked to blame objects. Rock music. I literally had somebody tell me this one time. There's a note on the guitar that will make you pee. There's a note on a guitar that will make you buy more. There's a note on a guitar that will make your clothes fall off and you'll have premarital sex outside of wedlock. Every generation finds a new object to fear, right? When I was a kid, I was not allowed to watch Star Wars because it was of the devil. Then it was Harry Potter. I don't know what it is now, to be honest with you. In my book, Hiding Behind God, which isn't out yet, I tell a funny story about a guy who approached me and was like, hey, I understand you're letting your kids read Harry Potter. I'm like, yeah, actually I am. He's like, well, Do you know that there are no names of demons in Harry Potter? No. Who talked to the demon? Well, what do you mean? Well, like, I know your name because we're talking. You know my name is Joe because we're talking. Who talked to the demon to get the known demon name? It's dumb. It's just illogical. And that's this, what we're talking about today. If you're not religious and you blame objects, don't worry, you're not alone. You're just like the religious people you may well disdain. They just add Jesus to it and the devil. That's it. And here's the thing. Like this week I had a conversation with them like, well, but the science is overwhelming. Like it's not even, you can't even agree to disagree. Well, hold on, young buck. I'm old enough to remember when the science was settled on eggs. They were bad for you. Now, my entire Instagram feed is full of, do you want to recover more quickly from your knee surgery? Drink 2 to 3 whole egg yolks a day because the protein and all the multivitamins and essential blah, blah, blahs will help you. Science is rarely settled nearly as much as we think, and especially about something we understand as little as the brain. But look, I understand why we want to blame objects. I understand why my dad didn't want me to watch Star Wars. I understand why I have friends whose favorite show was at one time the one about the woman who was having the affair with Kerry Washington was having the affair with the president. But they wouldn't let their kids watch Harry Potter because they didn't want to do things that God was, they didn't want to watch things that God was against. I still chuckle at that one. I understand why we want it to be the phones. Because if the problem is the phone, then the solution is simple. Just take the phone away. Just take it away. Come up with rules, take it away, and everything's good. Values, meaning, identity, fear, selfishness. If those are the problem, now the conversation is going to get uncomfortable. Now we have to talk about ourselves. We have to talk about how we're parenting. We have to talk about how we're approaching life. And that's where it gets uncomfortable. And this is where I lose people all the time. Because when I say, well, maybe it isn't the phone, maybe it's actually you. Oh, you're blaming me? Yeah. Mostly because I believe you're responsible for your life. Just like I'm responsible for my life. Not everything that happens to you, but you're always responsible for what you do. And that then becomes a very uncomfortable conversation. So one of the roles that I fulfill at my counseling agency is I am the intern supervisor. And one of the conversations that we have regularly is that most of the things that we look at life to either make us happy or that are somehow ruining us, what they do is they typically amplify what's already there in people more than they create people. And so money amplifies people. Power amplifies people. Influence amplifies people. Technology amplifies people. I worked in a very chaotic, violent environment at a hospital, a mental institution for 5 years. And one of the things that my supervisor, or my original supervisor, when I was hired, said to me, he said, people will tell you that this job will show you, will bring out who you really are. He said, what I've discovered is that it actually just makes who you really are far more plain. It shows you who you really are. That's another way to say it amplifies people. Because here's the thing. Phones did not invent insecurity. They amplified it. Phones didn't invent narcissism. They amplified it. In fact, one of the things that I remember was when Facebook first came out and people would put up pictures of parties and somebody in their friend group didn't get invited, they were mad because they didn't get invited. And they blamed the people because they didn't get invited. And I said to one of them one time, I said, well, what if you're just not in the circle of friends that you think you are? Like, in other words, I've talked about this before, we all have circles of friends, right? There's 1.5, which is, I always laugh because you can't cut a person in half, but the research, 1.5 to 6, or 1.5 by itself, and then 2 to 6, and then 7, depending on which theory you go after, 7 to 10, 11 to 15, and so on and so forth. And it looks like these people went out with their 1 to 8. And you thought you were in 1 to 8, but maybe you're actually in 16. And then they'd get mad at me, which is wild. And we moved from blaming the people to now we blame the Facebook, right? It's the Facebook's fault. But phones didn't invent loneliness. Facebook didn't create loneliness. It amplified it. And one of the things that it did was it promised relationships. But we're the ones who accept it. We're the ones who are like, well, I'd rather be on Facebook at home doom scrolling than actually going and doing something. And again, we're back to the spanking conversation. We tend to look at it like it can only be one or the other. Narcissism conversation. For a long time, the narrative that ran around anti-technology people was people say things on Facebook that they would never say in real life. And then there was a pretty big study done. I think it was in the thousands of people for the sample size. And the researchers concluded, nope, that's not actually true. People say the same things in person that they do on Facebook. Now, what we could talk about, and I've talked about this before, is what they say on Facebook can get in more people's faces. No disagreement here. But we do want to admit that it's not the phone creating it, it's human nature. That's where we want to be. That's what we have to run. It's human nature. Because phones also amplify a lot of really good things. They make it possible for me to talk to people that, like my brother. My brother and I were talking right before I started this conversation. He lives in Tennessee. I live here. If we were back to landlines, that wouldn't have happened because I'm in my office. I am able to interact with people far away from me in ways that I would never be able to do. I've been able to build businesses because of technology. I've been able to learn things because of technology. I've been able to connect with people around the world because of technology. Technology is only a tool, and tools reveal the people using them. They don't make the person. They just reveal the character that's there. Man, I've been debating this part. It's a little bit like common sense gun laws. One of my favorite questions for people when they talk about common sense gun laws is pick a shooting, any shooting, and tell me what the common sense gun law is that would have stopped that shooting. And I'm all ears. I mean that. I am all ears. Invariably, I don't get an answer. I just get, rah, and it becomes an ad hominem attack on me because I'm like, hey, tell me the common sense gun law because you've said you're not for confiscation. And it's a little bit the same. We do the same thing with phones. They're not going away. Technology isn't going away. And blaming it for us not having kids, for a declining population, is wild. So why are we not having kids? That becomes a fair question. And I think there's a lot of reasons. I think it's multifaceted. But I also think that some of it is pretty broad strokes, and a lot of those other reasons will fit into the broad strokes. I think the very first one is we have a right now mentality. One of the deepest problems in our culture right now isn't technology, it's immediacy. We're becoming conditioned to prioritize comfort, ease, speed. We'll put food in a microwave that'll be ready in 30 seconds that used to take us 2 hours to make, and we're drumming our thumbs. We consume most of our food pre-processed, pre-packaged, because we want convenience. And we worship at the altar of personal fulfillment almost over everything else. I saw a really provocative quote the other day. I don't know that I agree with it completely because I don't like quotes that genderize. I would prefer that it went with some and some because I think it's true of both genders. The quote was, always remember, men will sacrifice their happiness for their family, while women will sacrifice their families for their happiness and brag about it. What I would prefer the quote said was, always remember, some people will sacrifice their happiness for their family, while others will sacrifice their family for their happiness and brag about it. And take genders out of it because I think it's true of both genders. Because I think that's a human problem. And I think one of the things that we're doing is we are cultivating that with how we raise kids. Kids don't play baseball anymore. They go get the drip and they've got to look like the pros and they're dropping, thousands of dollars, house payments into playing sports. I love baseball, but we got to figure something out there. And here's the thing. Having a screaming 6-week-old doesn't fit very well into that framework. Having a 2-year-old that needs you to feed it and cries when it's not fed or isn't potty trained when you think it should be potty trained, or you can't come up with a schedule that you can make it follow doesn't fit into that world. We worship control. We're going to talk a lot about worship today. I know it's a church term, but we do. We worship control in our society. Most of the problems that I deal with in my therapy room around relationships are because people are trying to control things. And children, you can't control them. We try. We've tried for millennia, right? The generation before us tried by beating them. We try by having these schedules, and they got to be asleep by this time, and they can be up by this time, and they can only have this much food, and blah, 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 blah. And the reality is children interrupt your sleep. They interrupt your schedule. They interrupt your finances. They interrupt your freedom. They interrupt your convenience. They interrupt your plans. Just yesterday, my 20-year-old daughter sent me a text, hey, do you care if I cut the grass? And I said, you can do the side in the backyard. I do the front yard. And have at it. And literally, 25 minutes later, I get a phone call from her. And as soon as I saw her name, I knew what it was. She got something caught up in the blades. So I was going to go home and do one thing. I went home and did something totally different. I had to lift the mower up in a tree. I basically hang it on a tree with a rope with my truck. And I had to take the blades off and pull it out. And she didn't mean to, right? Like it wasn't her intention. But kids force you into sacrifice. And we're done teaching our kids that. That's why I started in the beginning of this episode I was talking about Memorial Day because that's the ultimate sacrifice. You died for someone else. But we don't really teach sacrifice anymore. We don't teach team sacrifice. You're not getting the playing time you want, son. That's okay. Next year we'll put you on a different travel team. You're not getting the plays aren't going through. I have a friend that coaches flag football. And he has parents complain about how many times their kids are thrown to. Yeah. I want to be really careful here. I know there are people who are listening who desperately want children and cannot have them. There's real pain there. And this conversation isn't directed at you. This isn't me saying, well, this isn't why you're having kids. I get that. I meet with those people too. Please, 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 please do not think I'm talking to you, because I'm not. I promise you. But I am talking culturally. We increasingly view children as obstacles to our self-optimization instead of part of a meaningful human life. We've petified our kids. In other words, we've turned them into pets. Like, oh, hey, look at my dog. Watch Remy roll over. Watch Remy roll this way. Watch Remy play dead. Because, and if we can't do that, we can't figure out how to get all the things that we want. I want to travel. Okay, cool. Travel. But you're losing something without kids. And, well, I'm not going to do that. Just stay on script here, Joe. Culturally, what we've done is we've made a massive shift. Historically, people had children in wars, in famines, economic collapses, uncertainty, disease, and instability. So when people say to me, well, we're not having kids because the world feels uncertain, I just don't buy it. I'm sure that's part of it, but we'd also be intellectually lazy to not admit that that is the socially acceptable answer. Because human beings have always lived with uncertainty. We've always had wars. We've always had corrupt leadership. I think something deeper changed. And I think we created a culture that increasingly asks, how can I maximize my own experience? How do I live my life to the fullest? So that, and we've defined fullest as how do I get the most pleasure out of my life? And we're selfish. I'm just going to say it. I think the two things, here, I'm getting so excited I hit my mic. I think the two things that happen the most is we want everything right now. We're not willing to wait for our kids to get a little bit older. And so we've delayed. First we were like, we'll delay having kids, right? We'll just wait. Well, then I'm too old. I don't want to do it. So now we're just not going to have them. And the idea that the world's overpopulated, it isn't working, folks. That isn't helpful. China said that, and now they're in real trouble. Those stats are all out there. I know when I listen to anything audibly that just gives me stats, I tend to fall off. But if you don't believe me, you can go look those up. I think the problem is kids force us to be selfless, not selfish. People that have kids fight more because one of the things that kids do is, again, they reveal our desire to be perfect, our perfectionism, how we're not going to fail and we're going to be perfect, and we can't have disagreements. Kids reveal our just incessant need for control, and they also reveal how little control we have. And so this is where it gets into mental health and meaning, because what ties into all of this is a life built around comfort, immediacy, and selfishness becomes surprisingly fragile. Because even a life cultivated to avoid sacrifice will eventually run into sacrifice. Because life will come for it. It will demand endurance. It will demand patience. It will demand responsibility. And if your entire emotional framework is, I should avoid discomfort at all costs, then adulthood itself starts to feel overwhelming. And this is why people, when I'm an adult today, I can't handle it. Right? If your entire framework is, my life has to be about me, you can't have kids. Because kids demand something of you. And most of our children, we are now at 50 years of telling our children that they're the most important person in their universe. I hear people say, my kids are my whole world. Okay, that actually probably isn't healthy. That's probably the other side of this coin that we're talking about today. Because relationships become harder when you can't have discomfort. Parenting, it has to be terrifying. And we don't do anything that we're afraid of, right? We need to talk about how we've approached parenting. Commitment feels restrictive. Well, I don't want to commit to that. We joke, I have commitment issues. I don't want to sign up for a phone contract, which I don't. I get that, the phone part. But yeah, relationships have a commitment. There's a commitment. You have a kid. Responsibility feels oppressive. Well, I got to work. That's me being responsible. I pay my mortgage and I pay for my traveling. Okay, what about doing something that means more than you or your pleasure? Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that kids cure mental health struggles. They absolutely don't. But I am saying that meaning often does improve mental health, and meaning requires sacrifice. Meaning often does improve health, and meaning often requires sacrifice. Our culture typically wants meaning without sacrifice. They want purpose without responsibility. We want connection without inconvenience, like I'll fit you in when I can. And we want growth without discomfort. It doesn't work. One of the things Viktor Frankl talked about after surviving the concentration camps of the Germans was that human beings can endure unbelievable suffering if they believe there is meaning in it. And meaning changes endurance. It improves it. And I think what's happening is we're watching a culture slowly lose meaning while simultaneously becoming more emotionally fragile. And that should concern us. We should look at how we're parenting. We should look at how we're using the tools. And one of the things that we should do is we should look at what are we teaching the next generation. Because some of it, and I've met people like this, I know a person that I'm pretty sure doesn't want to be a parent because he doesn't want to be a dad like his dad was. He doesn't want to be a bad dad. And we have to talk about that. We have to talk about what do we do with bad dads? What do we do with bad moms? What do we do with parents that make the world all about them? Because I'm also not talking about that today. I'm not saying, hey, you should have kids so that they can be the sole center of your universe. I absolutely hate that when people are like, oh, my kids are my whole world. Okay, well, that's not healthy either. That's not healthy for them or for you. I also think there's another layer that we have to talk about here that we don't often want to talk about. We're increasingly rejecting the idea of transcendence. And for a lot of people, this life is now viewed as it's all there is. Like we're here, we die, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And if this life is all there is, then making the most out of my personal happiness actually starts to make sense, right? If it's just, there's nothing beyond this, and I don't have a personal responsibility to anything, there's no afterlife, well, then I'm good to go. And of course, that person would prioritize travel, comfort, experiences, freedom, and self-fulfillment. Why wouldn't he? If there's no bigger story, no eternal framework, no larger meaning, then personal comfort becomes one of the highest values available. Again, I'm not saying that every person who doesn't believe in an afterlife is selfish. That would be ridiculous. That would be insane. But I am saying that cultures are shaped by what they ultimately believe life is for. And when sacrifice loses meaning, people stop sacrificing. And when we stop sacrificing, a decline in growth rates of our culture should not surprise us. Now, there are a couple other things that work against it. The media has told us for a long time that we're overpopulated. We've been told that people who have kids are more likely to get divorced. That's been disproven. The overpopulation thing is one that is constantly hotly debated. And then the other thing is this one isn't so much the media, it is more, and again, I'm not blaming media, we're the ones who believe it and then act upon it. But there is more of this, like if you have kids, they have to be the greatest at everything. You have to run them everywhere. You have to make sure that they're in all the sports. You can't just have a normal kid. They have to be the most brilliant child ever. They have to be the next future scientist, blah, 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 blah. And I think people feel that pressure, and we don't really know how to feel pressure and keep going in our society. And here's my problem. When we start blaming the phone, here's why I think it's dangerous. I actually think what this guy said is dangerous because it lets us avoid harder conversation. It turns what is a spiritual conversation, what's an emotional conversation, what's a cultural conversation, maybe even a philosophical one, into a technological issue. And it's much easier if we can just blame the phone, because then we never have to ask, what are we teaching people to value by how they live their lives? We never have to ask, what kind of adults are we forming? What kind of adults are we forming? What kind of what are we rewarding culturally? Isn't that a fun question? What does culture reward? And we now talk about the internet like it's its own living, breathing entity. And, you'll hear people say, oh, well, the internet did this and the internet did this. What they actually mean is people on the internet. Here's a fun one. What are we modeling? Are we teaching resilience? How about sacrifice and responsibility? Commitment? Service? Meaning? Or are we teaching our kids that they're the center of the universe, and then we're shocked when they grow up, they get married, if they get married, and they still act like they're the center of the universe? Here's a religious term. Are we slowly discipling people into the religion of self-centeredness while pretending it's empowerment? I've said before how I think we get empowerment wrong. We actually call meanness empowerment, right? Somebody's mean and they scream at people and they throw pain on them because they don't agree with them. They're empowered. Nope, they're a bully. And I think this is the conversation we need to have. Not our phone's bad, that's shallow, that's easy. The better question is, what kind of people are we becoming and how do we use phones? And I'm here for that conversation all day long. And this is why I say I'm always kind of caught off guard when I'm like, hey, I don't think it's the phones. And people are like, oh, you just give your kids the phones all the time? No, but I do give them to them early and often. I'll be real honest with you. All of my kids have had phones early and often. My son was the first one to have a phone that was actually a phone way early. My girls, it was 4th grade, I think, when they got a phone that was actually a phone. But they had devices before then. And have they always used them like I wanted them to? Nope. They didn't have social media apps. My girls weren't allowed to have Snapchat until they were 16. My son is not on any social media. Well, he's on the chess app. But that's it. And I'm always caught off guard when people are like, oh, right, we're back to the spank conversation. Oh, if you don't spank your kids, they can do anything. No. I can still teach them. I can still guide them. And when it comes to our phones and our technology and whether or not we're having kids, it really becomes wild to me. Because I think what we have to ask ourselves is, are there consistent themes in character and values that we're not talking about? And so the reason my kids have phones regularly is because I want to teach them how to use them. I want to be able to get a hold of them. My son is 13, and I cannot tell you how many times I'll be at work and I won't be at work. I'll be outside working, and he'll come out and be like, hey, Dad, can you beat my phone? I don't know where it is. Well, Joe, you got lucky. If I did, I got lucky 4 out of 4 times. Because while my kids are all on their phones more than some people would like, I'm sure, they're also engaged in society. They're also good students. They're also leaders wherever they go to work. They're also a lot of things that are character and values driven. And there are times with all of them, I will walk around and be like, hey, you've been on your phone a long time. Why don't you go do something? I'm not saying you just give them unfettered control, right? And if you listen to the one that I'm going to do on kids and phones in schools, we're going to talk about this much more in that episode. But I am saying that we have to stop blaming the tool and start looking at what does the tool reveal about our values. I don't think that phones are destroying society. I think that they are exposing the fact that society is destroying society. And sometimes exposure feels threatening because it forces us to confront things we would rather blame on objects. But true mental health awareness, remember we're in May Mental Health Awareness Month. True mental health awareness isn't about just symptoms. It has to include worldview. It has to include things about how do you find meaning? How do you find purpose? What do you think about responsibility? How do you feel about connection? What do you think about sacrifice? And ultimately, what do you think about hope? Because human beings are not machines. We need meaning. And when a culture slowly loses meaning, it shouldn't surprise us when anxiety, emptiness, loneliness, and hopelessness begin residing alongside it. When ultimately selfishness is truly the highest value and we call it virtue, right? Like how many times do you hear people say, I just have to be more selfish? When we hear that, we should be concerned because selfishness leads to loneliness. Loneliness leads to avoidance, and avoidance leads to really bad mental health. And we need to have mental health awareness conversations about that. If this episode helped you, challenged you, or maybe it irritated you and right now you're mad, that's awesome. Like, I'm glad. That's good. Because that means you're thinking about it. It means you're passionate about it. Would you share it with somebody else? I can't tell you how much that would help me. And maybe it'll help you and it'll help them continue the conversation. As always, keep showing up, keep growing. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. And hey, give us that rating in your podcast store. Until next time, change possible.